Agora sim.
¿Cuándo você acha que podemos comenzar? ¿O esperamos un poco más?
Pode começar já, Jorge.
Tá bom. Boas noches. Meu nome é Jorge Rossini, eu sou Senior Director de FTI para América Latina. Eu tenho base em São Paulo. Conmigo está Gareth Fools, que es su Senior Director de FTI, que va a conducir esta conferencia, esta palestra. Den para mí 5 minutos que eu quiero explicar un poco o que es FTI. FTI es una consultora internacional, nós temos base hoy 30 países, tenemos más de 7.000 empregados en total, y nuestra división, que es ALM, Asset Lifecycle Management, cuida da gestión do ciclo de vida do proyecto, desde que es una idea o una oportunidad, pasando por activación do proyecto, até o close-out do proyecto, ¿sí? do activo. Nós, como falei, estamos en 30 países. Falando en Latinoamérica, nós estamos en México, Panamá, Colombia, Brasil y Argentina. Yo estoy hablando de FTI Brasil, tenemos base escritorio en São Paulo. Algunos clientes nuestros, el objetivo de hoy es escuchar un poco a Gareth, mas ficamos después a disposición para explicar un poco de lo que nós hacemos. Hoy, básicamente, rápidamente, Asset Lifecycle Management tiene 4 pilares. El primer pilar es a consultoría en proyectos. Desde la consultoría misma en proyectos y portafolios, como también a escolha de ferramentas, implementación de ferramentas, que para eso nós temos especialistas do porte de software como Unifier, Ecosys, Kahua, etc. Do outro lado, do outro pilar, tem clientes que deciden no trabalhar a gestión de proyectos y tercerizar la gestión de proyectos. Y para eso nós tenemos un equipo de tercerización de proyectos y portafolios. Básicamente somos a mão direita do owner, en ese caso. No otros 2 pilares, nós trabajamos en lo que es operación, en lo que es gestión de activos. Ahí fornecemos servicios corporativos a fin de mejorar y optimizar los activos operacionales, mano de obra, reducción de costos, y también tercerización de lo que es a manutención. Un poco, básicamente, muy rápidamente, eso es lo que es FTI hoy. Yo voy a pasar a palabra para Gareth. Gareth, do you want to publish your slides?
I mean, we can, yeah.
Okay. Do it, please. Or if you want, I can do it for you.
Yeah, I can send you the latest version. That's fine.
Okay, go ahead, Gareth.
Oh, you meant on the presented here. Got it. Absolutely. I will take care of that now. All right, 1 second. Oh, can you stop sharing? It won't let me share until you stop.
I already stopped that.
You're still sharing your screen. It's still showing through.
What about now?
Yeah, it's still showing as you shown on the Zoom. If I can get,
I don't know what happened. Let me get out and get in again. But the start, you can start sharing, right?
not until you stop. You have to stop sharing. So it looks like it's a Zoom issue. There we go. Now you're not sharing.
Okay.
Right, perfect. Okay, can you guys see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you everyone for the time. I'm excited to be able to present this topic to you guys, talking about why earned value management is for contractors, while project performance management is for owners. It's definitely a topic I'm passionate about and look forward to sharing with you guys. So a little bit about me. I know Jorge gave an intro here, so I won't talk too much about FTI, but I'm the global leader of our asset lifecycle management practice. Got more than 20 years of experience and mostly now focused in really transforming the way that organizations select, plan, manage, build, commission, maintain, operate, and decommission their assets, and have a lot of experience in delivering projects and performing turnarounds and shutdowns and other types of asset management functions. And so what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of, it's obviously more focused on the project side, but there is some lead-ins to some of the asset management pieces as well. So I'll jump straight through to the topic itself. So, at the first and foremost, contractors and owners have competing objectives. And, while everyone that's involved in a project wants a successful project, what success looks like is often different, right? It's not the same for all parties involved. And it's really through these competing priorities that the industry as a whole has struggled to evolve past a two-party contracting model. And while you see so many challenges with some changes to the system, right? And what we're going to talk about today is a bit of a change in some respects, but it's also about how to collaborate more across the two parties here. So when you think about a contractor, fundamentally they're in business to provide services and provide those services at a margin where they're going to provide returns. And so in order to do that, they're going to do things like look to price the work fairly, but ultimately achieve the maximum price from the market, mitigate risks by offsetting those risks to owners and subcontractors, achieve or exceeding their bid margins, and investing in contractor-focused assets. And then on the owner side, their objectives are a bit less direct, as there can be a myriad of different drivers for the execution of projects. However, capital and operational efficiency are critical to success regardless of the drivers behind the project. So when you're talking from an owner's perspective, delivering the assets to meet commercial, regulatory, environmental, and other types of safety objectives, safely developing the assets in the optimal balance of time and cost, mitigating risk by offloading that back to the contractor and balancing contingencies, and then balancing those investments that they make in their own people, processes, technology, and data with the typical delivery models that they apply. Now, this isn't to say that the objectives aren't aligned at all, right? There's a common set of objectives that all parties are really working towards in order to safely deliver that asset. So if you think about it in that context, we're going to start jumping into the contractor side a bit and thinking about earned value. So at its core, earned value is primarily a contract management tool that really answers fundamental questions around performance against the contract. Earned value, defined more completely, would really be earned contractual value. Now, I know some will say, well, you can look at earned value across a project, but at the end of the day, that's an aggregation of the progress of earned value across all of the different scope and all the different contractual commitments. Whether those contractual commitments are with third parties or even with some internal resources to deliver, at the end of the day, it's really about measuring progress against the established plan. And so if you think about the history of earned value and you think about where it came from. It came from the United States government in the 1960s, and really started in the fact of trying to get more accountability to the work that was being delivered when it came to developing different projects and programs for the government. And ultimately, it was recognized as a good practice or a recommended practice, and ultimately ended up getting picked up by ANSI and EIA in order to codify that into the 748 standard in the 1990s. And so if you think about the roots and you think about those challenges, one might posit that, well, really, shouldn't that mean it's an owner's focused tool? But the reality, again, I go back to is contractual value. And the other value part of this is with respect to the financial reporting requirements that contractors have. So accurately reporting progress, what you've actually earned against those contracts, is actually quite critical to the finance and accounting side of the business. So when you look at the fundamental questions of earned value, it's really about answering three. Where have we been? Where are we now? And where are we going? And the fundamental concepts associated with those are obviously your planned value, your actual costs, and your earned value. And so when you think about that and you look at the time chart on the right here that we got from PMI, it's really about using that as a predictor of where we're going to finish. And so you do that by analyzing and using the fundamental variances and indices, which includes schedule variance in the schedule performance index, as well as cost variance in the cost performance index. And so when you look at that, it's really about understanding where are we against that plan, both in terms of time and cost. And so what does that mean in terms of benefits and challenges? It's got a number of strengths, right, that bring value to both the owner side and the contractor side. But it also has challenges rooted in its implementation and ultimately a narrow scope of what it can measure. And that's especially true for owners. So when you think about the benefits, it's a great tool to reflect the current state of where you are against those contractual commitments and against the overall scope of the project. It's a defined standard, which means that the language is common and it's easy to share amongst different parties. It's applicable to all the parties, as we mentioned. The plan and budget performance analysis is quite strong. It gives us great indicators of poor performance, and that leads into the ability to forecast from that in order to, again, predict where a project or a scope within a project may finish. But some of the challenges come in terms of progress measurement and really defining that, whether that's physical progress, measuring that by installed quantities, or measuring by other standards agreed to at the outset of the project. The value is ultimately tied to the contract. It's a big indicator as to how you're going against that contract, but it doesn't actually translate into the actual end value of an asset or the operational cost of that asset. Change management is another big challenge when we're applying that to the process. Obviously, we can incorporate it into our analysis, but understanding change, it continues to be a fundamental challenge. Impacts to the business objectives are missing. So if I were to tell you today on a project that we wanted to submit a change request for an additional $100,000 worth of work, how would we quantify that in terms of the benefits that we've gained as an owner? We would know what the cost is. We could have some ancillary benefits of what those impacts could be, but it doesn't translate into really evaluating that from a full value perspective to the business. And then the challenge of contract and scope structure alignment. Oftentimes, at the end of the day, the progress and the way that contracts are ultimately invoiced and paid does not always align to the actual scope and the way that we would want to manage it from a project execution standpoint, given some disconnects between procurement as well as the project team that's actually, project management team actually executing the project. Now leads us into project performance management. So when we think about project performance management, we're really talking about a wide array of capabilities focused on processes, analyses, and KPIs that are aligned to managing how projects achieve their business objectives. Now, business objectives are really the collective objectives that support the achievement of a project's business case. That might include returns. It might include a commitment that we've made to deliver for a customer. It might include regulatory or environmental mandates, or it could be achieving transition of the business into new assets, especially true given the circumstances we see today with energy transition and a lot of investment in new and emerging technologies and things like carbon capture and storage or hydrogen. And it answers some fundamental questions. There's more questions than this, but some of them that are key really are these three, right? Is the project still going to be profitable? Does it still make sense? And are we evaluating that and managing that as we continue to deliver the project? Does it still align to strategic priorities? And are we still on track to deliver for our customers? A lot of times we see that projects aren't continuing to meet those objectives, and those fundamental questions aren't being asked frequently enough. And the other great thing about project performance management is it extends the involved and interested parties. Earned value is often very focused on the project team and procurement, whereas when you're talking about project performance management, we're expanding that community to include the organization's leadership, the project team, including the owner and the contractor side, and a myriad of external stakeholders, right? Your customers, your shareholders, different business units, et cetera, that may have an interest in the performance of this project. And this leads to some very specific benefits. So if you think about maximizing project objective realization, it's really about doing what we said we were going to do in the first place. And it's about developing the right pieces in terms of project-specific KPIs, measuring project value, and creating that project historical information database that's really part of the core of the total cost management framework when you talk about AECE. So when you're talking about project-specific KPIs, KPIs as a whole are most impactful when they're dynamic, meaning that they're truly representative of what success should look like. And they actually help the team understand that these are indicators that they're not going to deliver or that they are on track to deliver. Measuring the project value. One of the biggest things that becomes very difficult when we're talking about mini projects and understanding their overall value to an organization feels like comparing apples and oranges. And really a part of project performance management is applying consistent weighted categories for the different value levers within the organization to identify and continue executing the right projects. And again, that project historical information database is a great lead-in to AI, to being able to use the data of the organization in order to establish historical project performance metrics and use those to help identify different flaws throughout the project lifecycle, build new insights, make better decisions, and ultimately really just limit the impact of poor decisions. And if you go further into this and you look at that improved capital and operational efficiency that I talked about earlier, we get into things like predictable project delivery. So what does predictability do? Well, it really allows the organization to bank on what we're doing, right? If we say that we can get an asset into service by a certain date, we have a high degree of confidence that's true. It allows us to make different commercial commitments. It allows us to understand and achieve the necessary funding to be successful and limits the cost of capital, among a number of other benefits. There's also a lifecycle cost reduction. If we're really clear in defining and communicating scope and the underlying business objectives of that scope, that leads to coming up with great ideas to drive down the lifecycle cost of the asset once that asset is built and put into service. So if we're thinking about those long-term objectives, we can identify opportunities that help us achieve those objectives, but do so in the most efficient way possible. And finally, resource management and utilization. By doing this and taking this approach, we have a better way of understanding where our people are needed and how to help them deliver better in different circumstances, which also ultimately gets them into a point where they're better managed, they have a lower resource churn, and then you get the higher benefits from utilization, active, engaged, and energetic team delivering your projects. So what does that mean in terms of solutions? Now, today, I'm going to talk to you about 5 different solutions that help with project performance management. This is a very broad and wide-ranging topic, and the solutions that are appropriate for one organization may or may not be for another, depending on those objectives, what they're good at, what they're not good at, their delivery model, etc. So when we think about the first one that we'll talk about today, we're really talking about the contract management side. So I think most folks that are involved in AACE are going to understand the critical nature of contract management, but that set of processes that is designed to ensure delivery of your contractual obligations and adherence to specific areas of compliance goes a long way in making sure that you're delivering on your projects. And I think this is a great functional integration when you're talking about the relationship between earned value and project performance management. And it ultimately serves as a very strong basis for the project controls for all parties involved. So why? Why is contract management part of the project performance management solution? It's really implemented in support of the different contracting strategies. The way we implement this tool, this capability, or set of tools and these capabilities is really dependent upon the types of contracting strategies that we're taking. So the approach we might take for contract management of a time and materials contract might be very different than a cost plus reimbursable. It provides a natural integration with project performance management, right? So that's that earned value, project performance, integration point capability. And it relies on what I would say are fundamental tools for most organizations. Using a CPI and an SPI, measuring productivity, tracking your progress, getting to install quantities, monitoring your contract variances, all are very key tools that allow you to have your pulse on the performance of the project. And benefits-wise, it goes into and measure specific progress, right? It provides you real insight onto the performance of those. And it's ultimately a key mechanism for evaluating that performance against the commitments that have been made. So it's a really great tool to tell us if we got a problem, tell us that we're on track, and ultimately document and capture what we're doing to address it. Now on the right, you see some key processes. I'm not going to go through each of these processes individually, but I would call out that the contract management side of this really contains a lot of information, right? When you look at these processes and you think about an RFI, or you think about safety incidents and you think about payment certifications, what you're really thinking about is all of the associated information that's available to you. And if you can leverage that information consistently to understand trends and where things are headed, and then supply that across all of your projects, it gives you a lot more insight and control to where your challenges are, and can help you identify very specific ways to address them. The next one.
Sorry, Jared, we have a first question.
Sure.
There is a question that they say, does project performance management treat change management better than AVA?
Better than?
And value analysis.
Well, so when you're talking about, does it repeat the question one more time, please?
Does project performance management treat change management better than end value analysis?
Yeah, treat it better. Okay, got it. Yeah, I would say so, right? Because we're considering the holistic impact of change, right? So often in change management, when we're thinking about earned value, we're really thinking about the change to the contract or the change to the scope, right? We're not necessarily considering the other aspects of that, at least from an owner's perspective. So again, I'll go back to an example of, if we could spend more money and achieve a better outcome against our business objectives, that might be a no-brainer. You know, one of the clients I've talked to in the past is Meta, right? And you know, they do large-scale data center projects, right? And a change might come in for $25 million on a project that they have. But if that got them to market faster, meaning that that data center was up and running a month or 2 months earlier, that might be a very easy change and an easy decision for them to make, because their objective in that case is to get the data center up and get to market as quickly as possible. And so from an earned value perspective, that's just a $25 million change. We're going to agree to pay that to the contractors that have submitted that change and so on. But when you look at it from a perspective of project performance management, you're looking about how does that impact our business objectives and how does that come into consideration? And most of the time we have that data, but we're just not using it effectively. And that's where project performance, I think, treats it, you know, a bit better.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So the next solution I wanted to talk about is actually going to start to illustrate this point. So contractor performance management is really implemented to better understand contractor performance throughout the project lifecycle and to understand opportunities for improving productivity in the field. So, you know, in this, I'm not going to go through the left on this one first. I'm going to actually start on the right here. If you look at the table and the chart below, what you see is kind of a traditional kind of set of values, right? But what you'll notice is that there's two values. There's a CPI based on current budget and a CPI based on the contractor baseline. Now, the difference between the two is that your current budget is what have you documented and approved, right? So that's what we've agreed to contractually. The contractor baseline is based on performance. So in a case where a contractor is spending more money due to productivity, for example, or some other types of delays or things like that, those are going to get paid by the owner, but they're not necessarily increasing any scope or adding any value to the outcome of the project. And so really measuring that when you're doing change management to understand the impacts of the budget, which is the traditional sense of change, but also what's the impact of their performance, their baseline? What is that doing to the scope? And if we look at that, you know, in this example, what you see is every time we submit a change request, the CPI for the current budget goes back up. And when this is all said and done, which is when we hit period 10, we finish at a 1.0 because that's where earned value is, right? At the end of a project, at the end, when it's all said and done, the CPI and the SPI are going to be a 1.0. When you look at managing the contractor baseline, you'll notice that at the end, it's reflective of what was really added in that scope and what was that value constraint. And then that gives you the opportunity to evaluate that performance a bit differently. And where this really pays off is when you're starting to look at that from two perspectives. One, as an owner, if a contractor is consistently coming in, bidding a price, winning work, and consistently not performing and having these impacts, then that's a great tool to see that and understand it and know that, well, on the next bid, maybe I need to apply a productivity factor. That's one use. Another use, though, is to start to raise questions. You know, when I look at this trend line, I want to understand why are we trending down in performance and productivity as we got towards the back half of the work? And what questions and how can we be collaborative as a contractor and owner community, as a project team delivering projects? How can we be successful together in order to eliminate those barriers that might be driving productivity challenges? So what we look at is insight, right? New information, new ways of working, and it becomes much easier to see when we see this kind of constant trend line down versus seeing it bounce up and down based on the fact that we've documented different things and we don't understand the real impact to the overall project. So how does that get measured, right? So CPI and SPI are still factors, and I mentioned that you can maintain that separate contractor baseline. And I will say that we've actually implemented this exact system for a refining client of ours, and they've been using it to really analyze this data in that way. But it gets into having tools for a contractor scorecard where we can evaluate these types of performance metrics alongside some of the other things that we talked about in project performance management, right? How many of these things did they come up with ideas that generated additional value for us as an owner, right? That's the question that as an owner you should be asking. Gets into pre-qualification, as I indicated earlier. Using that physical progress, really understanding where you are. There's no replacement for being in the field when it comes to delivering projects, right? And understanding what is creating the challenges and how and what can we do as a project team to remove those barriers. And ultimately, it really does help to avoid a lot of surprises, support your project historical information database, and does reduce the time-consuming project closeout process, because at the end of the day, a lot of the time we're going to go back and look at, hey, how much of this change or trend or delay was due to weather? How much was on us? How much was on the contractor? If we're doing that in the moment and we're managing performance in the moment, we have much more meaningful conversations and we can avoid a lot of that closeout work. One of the other big pieces that we'll talk about is the commercial.
Sorry, that
Yep.
related. We have a second question.
Sure.
Contractors scoreboard consists of what kind of information?
Yep. So when you're talking about a contractor scorecard, you're really talking about overall performance. You're talking about value creation, right? You're talking about safety incidents. You're talking about quality metrics. And so usually the way that we define those scorecards, it is going to be for each organization to meet their specific business objectives, but you're going to be in those ranges, right? Looking at the holistic performance of a contractor and understanding what additional value are they bringing, and that transparency between the parties where we're evaluating each other and having those candid conversations on a month-to-month basis, or even a week-to-week in some cases, really starts to set the foundation for the transparency that's required as we continue as an industry to evolve into more integrated project delivery models and collaborative contracting processes.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So from commercial management, I think a lot of people think about commercial management as ROI and IRR and basically financial metrics. But it has to go beyond that. You have to think of the broader value. You have to consider the strategic value, the environmental impacts, things of that nature. And when you're talking about that, you need a solid basis, right, for valuing projects based upon those different levers, and providing you need a mechanism to understand it and understand the broader impacts of the change. And then, that happens today in a lot of organizations. Sometimes it happens at the very beginning and it doesn't happen until it's commissioned and started up. But sometimes it happens at every stage gate. Some organizations do look at it on a change by change basis. But the consistency of that isn't there across the industry. And that's where applying the commercial management aspect that is much more holistic, and thinking about commercial from a standpoint of the impacts to the business really gives us a lot more insight. That's, again, ROI and IR, of course, they're going to be part of it. Understanding strategic value, understanding how you're going to manage your risk, the project scorecard in those different areas that I talked about, but also the score variances. If we, let's just say the total score of a project was 85 and we went forward with that project. And as we continue to march through the execution of the project, that score was trending down. Maybe now it's only an 80, and then maybe in 6 months it becomes a 70. At what point is that communicated? If it's already past certain stage gates, it might not even get looked at again until later. And that's where the constant issue of not meeting the stated business objectives comes into play. And the benefits of it are pretty clear, right? It measures that variance of the initial score for a project throughout its life, or to make sure that projects that we're executing continue to align to our objectives. It provides that bottom-up information to support the strategic portfolio management, and it informs very critical processes from procurement to change management to really understand the drivers to the business and where maybe downward pressure on contract pricing is exceptionally important in some projects, and it's less so in others. And on the right here, what you see is the latest updated diagram of that strategic portfolio management process, which was actually in the 2021 technical paper from Lance Stevenson. If you've not seen this paper specifically, it goes into asset management and how strategic portfolio management planning feeds right into that. It's very aligned with asset investment planning and things of that nature. And Lance has been a tremendous contributor over his career to AACE. I've definitely personally read a lot of his papers and seen a lot of his contributions in AACE recommended practices, right? And so if you think about this, this is really where I see AACE going, right? As we continue to evolve and go beyond the very basics of the project controls processes, which you see in the middle of the graphic here, we're moving to an impact that's much broader. It's much more organizational in order to really drive value in the projects that we're doing. And again, help to make those better decisions, which has always been a key principle of AACE. Are we good on questions, Jorge?
Not yet.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. Predictability is the next one, right? So I'm going to switch from AACE to CII on this one, but yeah, they had a research team that really was diving into the challenges of accurately forecasting project outcomes. And off the back of that research team, they produced a number of different recommended practices. But what we're experiencing is that many organizations, actually, I would say most, are still challenged in this area. And that gives us a lot of opportunity to really drive value, right? And predictability matters. It allows us to deliver more capital efficiency, but it also provides critical information for our finance and accounting compliance and better decision making. I've been involved in big mega projects where we're funding this thing in a variety of different ways, and really being able to accurately communicate when we're going to need to spend money, when we're going to put an asset into service, and how much it's really going to cost to do that, really can have material impact on the performance of the company. And so when you look at this and you look at the forecasting practices that you have and can apply here to be more accurate and encourage transparency, you can leverage the contract management and risk management and change management that you're already doing. And couple that with obviously tying all that back to the risk-based contingency reserves and so on, really gives you a lot it should give you a lot more confidence in being able to be predictable. And measuring that predictability in terms of the different predictability indices really allows you to measure how you're doing in that regard. And so if you look at those things, it's about, when we say predictability, it's about being able to communicate the cost of a project as early as possible and avoid what you see in the orange line in the graph here on the right, that hockey stick effect, right? This project A presents it's trending up the whole time there's communication. And at 70% of project completion, it's reflecting the correct forecast, which is still a 20% overrun in this case. And so we're missing those opportunities to adjust, to change our approach in different areas, because there could be a cost of capital, AFUDC, there could be several impacts to the project based on these surprises. Or it could mean with a 20% overrun on a large enough project that we've got to cancel projects or defer projects. So that predictability is incredibly important. And we still see struggles when we talk about predictability on the project level. We often still see struggles with predictability and being able to forecast the next period, the next quarter, the next year. And there's obviously the right practices already there. And we've just got to really start to encourage the transparency of those communications and keep people accountable to being predictable. And that really prioritizes, in the end, an understanding of scope and associated risks, right? If we're held accountable for what we're doing and what we're not doing, that comes off, in being more aware, encouraging that culture of transparency and problem solving for any issues that are potentially driving us up. And then ultimately it delivers greater returns, because if we can do more effective projects, even contractors see the benefit in terms of the reduced churn on their side, the smaller amount of issues they have at the closeout of projects and so on. And the last kind of thing we'll talk about today on this front is the external stakeholder impact management. External stakeholders are becoming more and more critical for the projects that we see executed, right? Whether those are infrastructure projects or new energy infrastructure projects, energy transition, how we're being responsible with the use of different natural resources. It's really creating a need for performance, to create the leverage and ultimately the permission required in the public sphere to execute critical projects. And successfully managing this in the impacts to this different community, of which you don't always have a direct line of communication, is really critical for achieving project success. And so if you think about going back to that project scorecard I talked about, the external impact to a stakeholder is really key to keep track of. And it's ultimately about reliably delivering on customer expectation to build the market better, but also the visibility and transparency to the community ultimately reduces effort. The more that we communicate what's going on in projects and people aren't surprised that a road is going to be shut down over the weekend to get this project, this next step in the project done. The fact that it was proactively communicated, the fact that there's ways to mitigate the impact of the community. It's a very simple example, but it avoids a lot of the complaints and a lot of the other follow-up issues that we have. And now more and more, with all of the activism around ESG and a lot of the impacts with navigating indigenous peoples and some of the challenges associated with the different geopolitical environments that we're dealing with across the board, it's becoming more and more important. And so when you look at this, it's really about making sure that if we're agreeing to a customer as an external stakeholder, that those delivery dates, we're keeping them appraised, we're keeping them informed that things are on track, they're moving up, they're sliding out, seeing what that does, and having the opportunity to address those issues. We're proactively communicating and reporting. We've done an upfront stakeholder impact analysis to that broader stakeholder group to make sure we know who's on our side, who's not on our side, how do we manage that, how do we communicate these things in a way that's going to be successful. And ultimately, the impact variance, indices, right? So understanding where we thought we could have a specific type of impact, where are we varying from that? Where are we having and experiencing challenges? On the right here is a few different charts. So I'll actually see if I can zoom in. Perfect. This is to me, one of the biggest real world examples of these a specific owner that has challenges, and that's in the regulated utility market. And what you see on the right here is this chart from JD Power around the customer satisfaction surveys. And a lot of people go, well, what does a project have to do with that? Well, the reality is when we start putting people are out of power for a project as we go to energize a certain piece of equipment, or we have other related issues around restoration or vegetation issues, things of that nature that cause problems for them, that gets reflected in these scores, right? And we have to have some way to capture that when the customer, the end stakeholder, is ultimately millions of people. So these are very key and real things. And then on the left, what you see here is a few things from FTI, where we've really talked about some approaches to deal with the impacts across different agencies, regulatory bodies, communities of people, dealing with things like fisheries or estuaries or other types of protected areas and so on. And then understanding how we can create those partnerships using the science and evidence and analysis to come up with the right plan. And then on the bottom, you just see some of the myriad of issues, right? The community relations, the water management, air quality, all of these things that we need to be aware of what that impact is to the community, so we can manage it, communicate it, measure it, and address it if and when it does become a problem. And so some of the benefits I've hit on, but we can improve those customer satisfaction scores. We can improve the overall returns from on-time delivery and reduce cost, but it also encourages a 360-degree view of project risk. I've seen a lot of projects come down with unexpected risks that were realized due to and became issues due to the fact that we missed something with respect to an environmental issue or other aspects. So I've talked a lot about project performance management. Kind of started with the earned value concept. And I wanted to kind of frame this up a little bit differently. We don't want to say that earned value isn't important and you shouldn't use it, and that project performance management is better. We actually think they go together, right? So going back to the beginning, you have your contractor objectives and your owner objectives, leveraging the contract management to understand how to communicate those and be creative in the way that we contract, I think has a tremendous opportunity for us as an industry. But then thinking about it from a perspective of earned value and project performance management, right? And thinking about the project management side and what we're doing with earned value, but thinking about those outcomes that we're trying to achieve, those business objectives, and managing those things with project performance management. And you can see there's that functional integration between earned value and project performance management. And then at the center of it is really that transparency and communication, right? So this is about creating these relationships and this transparency to make things come together. I'll give you a very, very good example of this in real life. We were doing a field productivity assessment on a pipeline project, and we were working with both the owner and the contractor. In this case, we were an independent third party to help them identify those issues. Everybody stacked hands. We were going to really look to figure out ways to streamline the delivery of the project. And we were in the field, we were going through this process, and we very quickly found out that the contract was becoming an issue and a barrier to improving. And what that issue was that the contractor wasn't willing to take on a risk to a firm fixed price contract. So by them agreeing to move up an in-service date, actually put risk onto them to deliver. But at the same time, it saved the owner organization a lot of money to finish early with all the reduced cost of being in the field for the extended period and so on. And in addition to that, the funny thing is that the contractor didn't want to have to send people home and wait for 3 weeks to start their next project, which happened to be with the same owner. And so we sat down and really worked together to identify, hey, what are the ways that we could mitigate this, where as a contractor, you're not taking on the risk, but we can actually get things set up to where we can put this in service earlier. And what if we could agree that if you finish this project early, we'll actually start you on the next project. And so when they all of a sudden started sitting at the table, being transparent, communicating, understanding those broader business objectives and what it meant to get that asset into service earlier for the owner, they figured out a way to make it work, which in their case ended up being an example of for every dollar that the owner saved, the contractor was going to get a 25% piece of that. So there's ways it can work. We can be more collaborative. We can consider the broader objectives that aren't just the dollars, understanding the impacts of schedule, understanding the impacts of being able to deliver early for customers and begin the next piece of work before we start to enter more challenging weather patterns. All of those things can be done. It's just a matter about how can you see it? How can you have the right scorecard around the objectives for your projects? So just in closing, why does it all matter? At the end of the day, it comes down to, considering a holistic view of project value. If we were to only look at ROI when we're doing projects, we wouldn't do any environmental or regulatory projects. And the reality is we have to in order to keep our businesses going. So We got to look at bigger, broader considerations of value beyond ROI. Encourages that culture of transparency and high communication. Provides a structure to understand the impacts of change beyond just the cost or the schedule impact. Establishing a framework for collaborative contracting. And providing insights to your own ability to execute projects. I've talked a lot about contractor performance, but as an owner, are you really doing the right things? Are you good at executing projects and coming up with the right solutions and candidly getting out of the way when you've contracted with a contractor to do a specific piece of work? It aligns different business functions across organizations on common objectives. If we all can agree what matters for this project to perform well and be considered a good project, we can change our behaviors because we can real measure it and we can hold ourselves accountable to it. And if you do these things, then three great things happen, right? We get decisions that are better aligned to strategy. We improve the time to value and operational efficiency of the capital and operational dollars that are being deployed. And better performance on all of these projects ultimately creates more projects. If we can successfully deliver and we can prove that we can deliver, the end result is we have the opportunity to do more across the board, and that's good for everybody involved. So with that, I'll turn it back over for Q&A.
Aldo, ¿tenemos alguna pregunta, além das dudas respondidas? O Manu?
Não, só temos essa mesmo.
Okay. No question at all, Garrett. Aldo, bueno, gustaría de agradecer a la ACE, al branch de Brasil, por la oportunidad que dio para FTI, en nombre de Garrett y o meu, Jorge Rossini. Muito obrigado por seu tempo e, bom, ficamos à disposição de vocês no futuro, se vocês querem que enviemos a palestra para vocês, o PPT não vai ter nenhum problema. Garrett, you want to salute?
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time and the opportunity to share some insights on this topic. This was an entry into the topic. Would really enjoy anybody that has any questions and wants to follow up later and talk more about how to implement some of these project performance management steps.
Excellent. Novamente, muito obrigado. Boa semana para vocês. E novamente, Aldo, muito obrigado por a oportunidade. Y ficamos a disposición. Thank you very much, Garrett.
Thank you.
Bye.